Uh, some people say that I look a little bit old. I would say I think I look beaten up, and the way I see it, there's a lot of similarities between my case or my past relationship, and the case of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. So what's similar? Clearly, his career, his life and reputation destroyed by lies and abuse and psychological torture. That was the same. What's different? First of all, I have 3 children with that partner or ex-partner, and then he collected a lot more evidence, especially on the video, and he has lawyers and he's wealthy and he won. I don't have lawyers, I'm not wealthy. Any money I had was gone for other things, mainly the family, and then obviously I lost. So far I lost everything. And then also he had and still has a supportive circle of friends and family, and I lost all of that even before and then during the relationship. So only recently I have managed to rebuild some of the old circles and new friends, and basically starting a new life. Not a lot, but let's say quite a few people did already watch some of my other videos related to my story, and then some people said they want to hear my story, and I will try to keep it a little bit short. I was born, as it's obviously known from my now the most watched video, in 1982 in a place that was still back then called Yugoslavia. I was born to 2 parents who were basically what you would call even back then a completely working class. Not really high education or anything like it, not a lot of income. And by the time I was 7, I became a brother. Then in 1991, the war in Yugoslavia broke out. On our side, that is Slovenia, we were a bit lucky. So our war only lasted for 10 days. It wasn't nowhere near that brutal as it was then in following in Croatia and Bosnia. So yeah, for the most part we've seen a lot of brutality on the TVs happening, obviously in the rest of the region. Heard a lot of things if any one of us like me were hanging out with the kids and the refugees. So yeah, it was really terrible period to live in, and also my childhood was really hard. So both of my parents lost their jobs between those years, so between the 1989 and 1991, and on a scale of poverty, I think we immediately fell on sort of the bottom of the poverty scale for those times. And that's, you know, in the early 90s the times were really good. People were actually just starting to, because of now newly born so-called democracy in Slovenia, people saw many opportunities, businesses and so forth. So I would say that was the golden era for our country at that time and for the many people. Having said that, my parents were definitely not well educated. Their own childhood, their own life was really hard as well. So both of them had a lot of issues. You know, things like mental health and all of sort of information around the mental health at that time were really limited, primitive, and it was a huge taboo theme, of course. So let's say generational trauma, especially for that time, in that region before the war itself was already really difficult and hard. Even to this day, there's this cultural thing to repeat the same generational trauma from the Second World War, where there was a lot of, we had a lot of collaborators, so basically traitors and people who are still to this day very hated. And then on the other side we had people who were obviously working with the anti-fascist and the communist and then also the West to beat down the fascism and Nazis and so forth. So yeah, there's still a lot of resentment, a lot of generational trauma going on even these days, and there's no effort or very little effort to actually heal that, as in basically just become another opposition to this kind of dynamic. So everything is more opposing winds instead of trying to collaborate and just heal each other regardless of what happened in the past, right? So that's the kind of place where I come from. So bullying in school, at home, a lot of abuse, and then domestic abuse in terms of between me and my mother, two younger sisters, and then at the age of 13, because of my parents' inability to keep up with their life and responsibilities, we also got evicted. So my father was basically left homeless, and myself, my mom and two sisters, we were moved to a safe house. For the next 4 years we spent living in that safe house. I would say that was kind of, for me, being at that time 13 years till 17, was a pretty good time. You know, I was relatively free to do pretty much anything I wanted. My mom didn't have so much control over me even when she tried, so that's pretty clear. But I was not a bad guy. I did not actually go down the line of drinking too much or drugs or criminal activities. But as any other kid at that age would do, like I was, let's say, bicycling really fast, so that sometimes the cops would not find me with anything, of course, but they were a little bit worried about me. I broke my wrist at that point once, going way too fast. Then yeah, we got drunk a couple of times. When it comes to smoking weed, I was about 15, I think, when I had my first joint and things like that. But you know, nothing was going on down the line of ever causing anything to myself that I would consider very dangerous to me and my life and so forth. So still going to high school at that point, of course, I think I had my first girlfriend when I was 16, so that relationship was, you know, for me pretty serious to begin with. But because of her own challenges when she went on holiday with her parents to another country, let's say, she was unfaithful, and that basically ruined our relationship and broke the trust. So it didn't work out. After a year and a half we broke up, and consequently I decided I've had enough of taking care of my mother and sisters and basically being the head of the family or whatever. And I left my home. Well, it wasn't exactly our home. At that point we were renting this small flat that mostly I was paying for myself, and then I decided to leave, and I became a squatter. Signing up to a new high school at that point turned out to be really difficult, because they couldn't understand that, you know, I'm basically 17, almost 18, and taking care of myself, and that I live away from my mother. The only thing I've got with her is basically my address, and my residence is still registered over there, but that basically I'm legally able to make my own decisions, legally and otherwise able to make my own decisions. And the decisions I wanted to do was to get the dormitory. At that point, in the way our system worked, you could get enough of scholarships, so like nationwide scholarship for low-income kids and families, that you could actually pay just enough for the dormitory for the month. The rest you kind of had to figure it out. So let's say going to school and then doing some weekend jobs would work out for me to be able to survive. But because at that point, as I was trying to make that work, In the meantime, as the government figured out that I don't live actively on the same address where I'm registered, what they do, they would automatically remove you from the register of permanent residence. So you keep your citizenship and you keep your tax number. So you still have to pay the taxes, but I was not able to get my ID, so no ID documentation whatsoever, and health insurance, and basically nothing else. So no welfare, no social security, no nothing. So I was in basically like a limbo where I couldn't even leave the country at some point. That situation in itself obviously led to me being involved, so not so voluntarily, or basically it just happened as part of the consequences in my life. I got involved in sort of discussions with the UNICEF, and they had an anniversary of the 10th year anniversary of Slovenia signing the Convention of the Children's Rights. So I was invited there to speak about my life and speak about myself. They said it was very important to them, so I felt at that point, maybe for the first time in my life, validated and happy that someone like myself will be heard. Because at that point I was living in another squat and sharing it with another 6 guys, and we did have a lot of visits from kids, so guys and girls from families that were in a similar way in a lot of trouble, and these kids were in trouble, and most of them were basically for a lot of time homeless. So they were spending their time with us and then maybe going home for the weekends or twice a month or so. So to speak, a lot of us were basically just surviving on our own, helping each other. We were a bit like a family and really brotherhood, sisterhood. But yeah, it was very hard to survive. We were living in a house where we didn't have running water, so we had electricity. We were stealing from the public, from the public network for power. So as squatters, we rebuilt the house, we rebuilt the garden and things like that. So it was really fun, actually, to be honest, but hard. Yeah, my story came out. I was in the national media, I was in the national radio, TV stations, newspapers. At that point there was no such thing as social media, not even blogs at that point were really popular, so all you had was really just first kind of websites, maybe some bigger blogs at the beginning, and social media was starting later on. So at that time, in a country with roughly 2 million residents, I became quite known, popular, so to speak. A lot of people knew about me, a lot of people saw me on the TV and stuff, but for the large part, most people have a very short attention span. So if I did ask them, you know, you've seen me, you kind of know what I've been talking about, but do you remember anything about it, and do you know what was it about? And they clearly did not. So I had to quickly learn from the experience that people will remember your face, but on a very then on a very surface level what it was on about. So never mind. Story moving forward, with my exposure in the media and also being the squatter activist for human rights, sort of like an anarchist, but you know, not really dedicated or labeling myself as such, but I was more studying where's the injustice and the corruption in the system. So at the end of the day, nowadays people would say, you know, you're into conspiracy theories and stuff like that, but that's not the fact. It's just really being more like an investigative journalist, but I never deep dived into reporting and actually sharing the stuff that I've learned, investigated and learned and discovered in my life. So I knew very little back then compared to what I know now, but even then I just knew that there's a lot of issues with the society and the system, and also the way people tend to basically ignore the toxic relationships we all have in families, the schools, with friends, with the system, with the government, ourselves, and all of this kind of stuff. So generally toxicity and abuse were and are still very normalized in the large part of the global society, and also what we call ourselves civilized and all that stuff. It's all just basically nonsense and total bullshit. Given that I've had a tough life, clearly I was involved with psychologists, therapists, and experts, talking to them a lot, and many of them, from my own experience, later on did need help for themselves, because they simply, for what I know, they couldn't figure out how the hell am I able to actually keep myself in balance and together and as healthy as I am, mentally of course, even though that I was going through a lot of abuse to begin with. And yeah, clearly one thing when they were right and I was a little bit ignorant was what sort of trouble and issues I will have with relationships. Because for the most part, I used to have healthier boundaries, except for when the children got involved. So as soon as there's my child, so the firstborn, he's now 16, I simply could not let go. Became loyal, so basically it's not that the toxic woman or a woman that doesn't want to share and communicate and actually just keep her word in a sense, because I know I've changed and I've done my best, with all the mistakes involved. Everyone does make mistakes, but you keep growing, you keep learning. So yeah, and I simply kept forgiving non-stop and too much. And I will say also to myself, because when I became too toxic, in certain points also aggressive, whether I was protecting myself or just trying to assert myself, it was wrong in a sense that I had better options, even when seemingly for me there were none. Like nowhere to go, family circle, no really kind of friends where I could stay there for maybe 2 weeks, maybe some time to actually get my own reflection on what's going on. So I've learned to suppress and mask my emotions from most of the society and then ultimately myself. So pretty sure that if I asked for help, the people that were around me and trying to help and learned how to listen, things would have been very different for me. And now, reflecting back on everything, so why I'm even sharing all this and saying it is because what I'd like you to understand from all of this, whenever young or older, it doesn't matter, but whenever you are entering any kind of relationship, obviously, ideally, you should already know what you want. So my mistakes were, in that sense, the arrogance that I knew from my own observation, intuition, and the talents that I have, and then also some of the research done to that point. I knew quite a bit about psychology, but I knew I was also acting like I know a lot. So let's say I knew more than the person that I was talking to. Definitely, at least from the experience point of view. And I was doing my best to try and resolve and find solutions and resolve any conflict when I was calm and when I'm sensible, when I'm able to think and when I'm able to articulate myself. But because of the lack of the information that I had at that point, so I did not know enough about the whole cluster B personality complexes. So that's narcissistic, borderline, antisocial, all of that kind of stuff, the whole spectrum of that. I was like, yeah, I know people are messed up, but kind of like my arrogance was like, everybody is messed up. So am I, yeah? So because I'm messed up, so is everybody. If I can work it out, so can everybody. And that was wrong. That was like just so self-deluded that people are willing to change, because in my opinion is like, when you're willing to change, you see that what you're doing either to yourself or to others is really bad and toxic, because whether you're angry at someone else because of what they did to you, that anger is still eating you from the inside, especially if that person is so immature that you never get anywhere with your arguments and conflicts other than further arguing. So conflict must lead to a solution, otherwise it's a breakup point immediately. Not so once or twice maximum, but that's it. So I didn't take responsibility on myself. So at that point, the house was mine. The children were still not there, basically. But I really so much, not just loved this woman, but I felt for her, as in, I knew that she's all alone, that her mother simply does not listen to her and does not understand and doesn't even know who her daughter is. Turns out in the end, nobody also knew who her mother is, which was even worse. But I also was not, until recently, informed by herself who she is, who my ex-partner was. So by being deceived, I never had any proper choice and information that I could have and make my choices on what I'm going to do and who I'm actually deciding to live with and have a family with and stuff. So in the sense of things, my complete reality was getting shattered from the start, and because I was already a bit of a mess when we met, in a sense that my work environment was extremely toxic. I knew I want to change my life and I need the changes for myself. I was definitely nowhere near ready, and at that state of mind, prepared that now I'm gonna have to also fight for survival in my own home, in the house that I was paying for. It literally started with her saying, "Why do you keep saying this is your home? Are we not together? Are we not a couple?" Yes, of course we're a couple, but I'm paying for all the bills. Just because you bring some food on the table and your butt in the bed, it doesn't mean that the rest of the stuff I've worked all my life is yours. I pay for it and I bought it. You are here, you don't contribute to the rent, and you also occasionally act like a bitch. So it's not yours. We're not sharing that, if that's what you mean. And of course, by all means, everyone can probably guess that this did not end well. And not like it ended with me, again, reacting. It could be enough for me to just, she was starting her rage fit, and I would leave the house. But I had to leave my house and then walk back after a while and try to get things back in order. But once I continued to allow that to happen and continue to happen, it was a clear sign that my life was gonna be over. And as soon as the child was conceived, I also knew and I immediately felt that I am completely screwed. But I could not leave the kids behind. For the most part, I couldn't leave the kids behind. And the way I see it now, that would be just one child. And I guess as soon as I could pick my pieces together and get my mind clear, I'd do the same as I have to do now, protect the kids. Be the father and be the man, like I have no problem imagining a life being a single father and being responsible for these kids and doing whatever one must do. I changed the diapers for both of my little sisters. I know how to feed them, I know how to clean the babies, and I know how to take care of them. My parenting skills were something that were far from great, so I still had to learn and develop, but this is something that I was always interested in. That's why all of my kids are in the Montessori school. They are not just in any school. So it's kind of clear that with all of my abilities and the lack of knowledge that I already had at any point in my life, I was still trying as best as I could and as best as I could find out. So my advice to people ultimately would be like, really know yourself, know really well what you want, inform yourself really well about these things, learn about your shadows, heal yourself, work on yourself, have healthy boundaries, respect yourself, and most of all, when anybody starts to cross your line, give them a fair warning. And the second time they keep doing that, turn on the camera. And then, whatever force and offensive they use, make sure you keep that video recording. And if they attack you physically, protect yourself with the force just adequate enough to stop the attacker. Never become the aggressor yourself. That's what it is. Please, always respect yourself, protect yourself, and protect others. Peace. Love you all.